So why is a perfect 360-degree circle considered the geometry of death, while a slightly flawed 377-degree spiral is actually the blueprint for life? I know, it sounds like some kind of philosophical riddle, right? But it's actually a profound mathematical truth. You see, perfection basically means stasis. It's a closed, flat loop with absolutely nowhere to go, but a tiny, precisely tuned mathematical flaw. Well, that right there is the required engine for dynamic, three-dimensional life.
Welcome back to another explainer. Today we're diving deep into the seat of the vortex and uncovering a fascinating extension to what we know. What exactly happens when the Fibonacci sequence flirts with pi at 180 degrees? We're going to unpack the groundbreaking May 2026 research by Emily Newton and Jean-Claude Perez. They've managed to show exactly how flat theoretical geometries use tiny deformations, specifically in the immediate vicinity of phi, the golden ratio, to spiral into the structural logic of living systems. Here is our roadmap for today. We'll start with the perfect pentagonal geometry, then look at the necessary imperfection, move into the dist-6 bracketing effect, see how we're filtering mass into codes, explore the master code of biology, and wrap up with the seed of the vortex.
All right, let's jump right into Section 1, the perfect pentagonal geometry, where we establish the baseline of pure mathematical perfection.
Everything begins with one fundamental angle. If you take pi radians, which, as a reminder, is 180 degrees, and divide it by 10, you get exactly 18 degrees. Now, think of this 18-degree angle as the universe's ultimate static building block. In regular pentagonal geometry, this is the absolute cornerstone. It serves as our completely static geometric ideal.
And as we can see beautifully illustrated here, within the pentagon, that 18-degree angle is perfectly balanced. It creates a tightly closed, mathematically ideal loop. But here's the catch. Biologically speaking, it's totally static. It literally has 0 degrees of freedom. It's essentially a dead end.
Which brings us to Section 2, the necessary imperfection for three-dimensional life, and why biology absolutely requires a little bit of wiggle room.
So on one side, we have inert resonance. That's your perfect 360-degree closed loop, which translates to flat, two-dimensional death. But on the other side, we have the geometry of life, because it turns out nature is actually a terrible perfectionist. Nature hates a perfect circle. Life demands a dynamic 377-degree spiral to actually burst into complex 3D form.
Now, the 14th Fibonacci number is 377. That is a 360-degree circle plus a 17-degree twist. But where exactly does that 17 come from? Well, it's our ideal 18 degrees minus exactly 1 degree. This minus 1 degree deficit, this tiny little flaw, is the magic spark that converts a totally static circle into a living, breathing Fibonacci vortex.
This minus 1 degree offset isn't a defect at all. It's the absolutely essential wiggle room. Without it, biological systems would just lock up into catastrophic resonance closure. This precise imperfection forces the geometry to destabilize and spiral outward into the complex three-dimensional forms that make up your very own body.
Moving on to Section 3, the dist-6 bracketing effect. This is the hidden engine behind what we call the Fibonacci shadow.
Looking at this data, the dist equals 6 bracketing effect reveals a stunning, predictable pattern. If you jump exactly 6 steps forward in the Fibonacci sequence, the math naturally brackets multiples of our 18-degree ideal. For example, Fibonacci 8 jumping to 144 perfectly hits our 0 variance mathematical anchor point. But jump from 21 to 377, you get a minus 1 degree variance. That tiny mathematical discrepancy right there is our vortex seed.
You can kind of think of this whole thing like a mechanical process gear. A base discrete Fibonacci integer enters the system, it gets multiplied by the continuous 18-degree ideal, and then hits a variance node. This node acts as a systematic detuning offset, mathematically bracketing the ideal geometry to generate the exact structural logic needed for life.
Next up is Section 4, filtering mass into integer codes, where we look at translating messy physics into clean, usable data. This system basically acts as an incredible natural filter. In Step 1, continuous, chaotic physical mass data from organic compounds, like DNA and RNA, enters the system. Then, in Step 2, the geometry steps in as a pi divided by 10 neighborhood filter. Finally, in Step 3, that raw messy mass is funneled and distilled into exact, clean integer arrays, outputting simple sequences like 101, 234. It's an absolute marvel how physical mass can form so perfectly to this math. Here we can actually see this hidden law of 377/17 in action. Continuous, chaotic atomic mass is practically forced to organize mathematically around this base geometry by passing through the pi/10 filter. And what pops out? A perfectly clean integer array. It is literally the bridge between messy physical reality and pristine biological data.
Which takes us to Section 5, the master code of biology, scaling all this up to the structural logic of the DNA double helix. This structural logic builds from the ground up, starting from a foundational perfect geometry, moving through an algorithmic growth gear until it creates a unity token. This fundamental token then scales up perfectly to become the exact same geometric rule governing the actual packing and folding of the DNA double helix. The predictive power of this pentagonal master code is just immense. It essentially forms a periodic table of biology, clustering 162 genetic code compounds strictly by this pi/10 rule. And astonishingly, that zero-variant structural anchor we mentioned at 144 degrees, it mathematically aligns with the resonant consequence of frequency 432 Hz. That proves the geometry of life is intricately, undeniably bound to the physical frequencies of the universe.
Finally, we reach Section 6, the pentagonal master code, geometry of the vortex seed, our final visual synthesis.
Synthesizing this addendum and final new discovery from May 2026, we find the ultimate equation of life, 377 degrees equals 360 degrees plus 17. Laid out here as a blueprint, this proves that the 17-degree deficit is the exact mechanical tolerance required for living beings to escape static inertia and actually assemble in 3 dimensions.
Ultimately, this visual conclusion from May 24, 2026, laid out like a biomimetic engineering blueprint on graph paper, shows us that life itself is the Fibonacci shadow. It's an elegant, spiraling escape from flat geometric death. By resting in the immediate vicinity of phi, the golden ratio, life harnesses this tiny mathematical deformation to continuously grow, pack, and build the amazing 3-dimensional complexity that makes us who we are.
So I want to leave you with this question to ponder. If a simple 1-degree flaw is the absolute engine of all biological form, what other so-called imperfections in the universe are actually the blueprints of existence? It's a pretty mind-bending thought to end our explainer on today. It reminds us that sometimes perfection is highly overrated, and the true beauty of existence lives entirely within the wiggle room. Thank you so much for joining me, and keep exploring.